Thank you very much for that introduction. I'll also be speaking on behalf of Phillipa Puzey-Broomhead today. He's one of our fieldwork project managers, but she can't be here because she's on maternity leave now, so it'll just be me. So I'd like to talk about how archaeology, geoarchaeology, and also palaeoenvironmental data can help inform scheme design. As we're all painfully aware, we're living in a time of climate instability, which is leading to changes in how we manage landscapes, both inland and on the coast. We understand very well the direct impacts from things like construction and the effects they have on archaeology and palaeoenvironmental sediments. Perhaps what's less well understood and more concerning is the indirect impacts from climate change. Organisations like the Environment Agency, local wildlife trusts, Natural England are designing schemes to cope with this instability. And these are linked to natural flood management, biodiversity net gain, and coastal managed realignment. These schemes are incredibly diverse and are designed to create resilience within any given landscape system. Now, whether that is improving existing wetlands, the creation of new wetland features, or reshaping a system with hard landscaping such as flood banks or overflow channels. We've seen in the last few years just how extreme some of these climate events can be, and the bottom two images on this slide are just from this January in the Trent Valley, and we're still experiencing levels of waterlogging within the region even now after these winter storms. So this is not going to get better. So the types of schemes we've been involved in, like I say, have been diverse. Whether it's been natural flood management through the restoration of former channels, or the creation of new channels within an existing floodplain, or channel reprofiling, which often tend to be the larger scale schemes, down to the smaller scale sort of wetland creation or wetland improvement schemes which a local wildlife trust might enact. And these can involve the excavation of ponds and scrapes. These are often done under things like countryside stewardship, which I know is changing into environmental land management. These often have very small budgets, but they're still having an impact on a landscape that is archaeologically and paleoenvironmentally sensitive. And that can expose extremely important deposits, perhaps that weren't known how great the potential was of those deposits. So again, it might only seem a small impact, but it can actually cause bigger problems, particularly when your budgets are quite small. So through these projects, we can gain really important landscape information from those sediments, from those deposits, using multi-proxy paleoenvironmental analysis, pollen, plants, insects, all of those things can help us build up a picture of how that landscape evolved and developed over time. That can have important implications not only for how we understand archaeological risk or paleoenvironmental risk, but also how the scheme designers might respond to the scheme they're actually creating. We can also build deposit modelling, and it wouldn't be one of my presentations if I didn't like that. What's great about deposit modelling is it's usually low cost, it's quite rapid, we can use pre-existing data, but we can also integrate that environmental data that we can gather from the site as well as archaeological data. And that can basically be bolted into a comprehensive, nuanced model of the deposits, but also risk, and also how we understand how the landscape has evolved through time. Now, deposit modelling is brilliant. It can be used at any stage of a project, but obviously the earlier the better. But it should always be improved and tested and updated as we go along with any given project. So I'm going to use a few examples that I've worked on over the years, particularly with York Archaeology, but also I just wanted to flag this small-scale project. It was quite a long time ago now, probably 15 years. But this is Botany Farm in Suffolk on the River Old. This was a relatively small-scale project. This was a really denuded wetland where they were trying to make improvements for RSPB reserve, basically to encourage ground nesting and wading birds. As part of this scheme, Oxford Archaeology did create a deposit model for the site, and we used that to place trenches to look at where these ponds might impact on deposits. And that did reveal, I mean, it's not a great photo because, you know, brown on brown and all the rest of it, but these are early Neolithic pits excavated into an island in the wetlands. And inside those pits were deposited a carefully curated flint assemblage. Really small trench, a lot of data came out of it, but what we were able to do for the RSPB is to redesign where their ponds went. Now, not only did this allow us to preserve the archaeology in situ, but it also probably placed that pond in a better location into the wetland, so it remained waterlogged for longer periods of time through the year. So in this way, we not only influence design to protect archaeology, but also perhaps to improve the performance of the scheme itself. And on the larger scale, we have projects like the River Thames Scheme, the Environment Agency funded project. Now, this scheme has been going on probably since about 2015. We created an initial deposit model. This scheme is a 16 kilometre long flood capacity improvement channel. That's a direct impact, and we understand that very well, but we have lots of indirect impacts by the habitat creation that goes alongside that, including things like access roads, compounds, storage areas. So we were able to create a conceptual model before groundworks began, which we then subsequently updated with the purpose of geoarchaeological surveys and archaeological trial trenching. Alongside that, we also collected high-resolution palaeoenvironmental sequences that were able to basically demonstrate how each site and wetland creation area evolved over time. So within that data is important vegetation succession information. This scheme is still ongoing. It's still being designed. So we're feeding this back in real time, back to those scheme designers. We're having meetings with the ecologists. All of this data is being fed back into the project to hopefully inform how those habitat creation areas are going to evolve and develop. And we've also had discussions about how planting might maybe reflect some of this paleo-environmental data. Other large-scale schemes along the coast also can provide this kind of information. This is the Skefflling Scheme up in the Humber. This is a 1,000-acre site. It's basically going to involve the removal of the current flood wall, moving it further inland to create a new area of wetland as compensatory habitat, but also as a flood storage area. Again, we were able to make a conceptual deposit model using LiDAR, but also some of the geotechnical information from the preliminary investigations. And as we've carried on with the project, we've continued to update that model using geophysics and archaeological excavation, but also purposes of geoarchaeological borehole survey. What we've been able to demonstrate there is sediments preserved at the site from the late Windermere into Stadial all the way through to the early Bronze Age. And we've changed the model several times. Again, these are living, live things. These models of the deposits and sites aren't static entities. We are always updating them and we're always feeding them back to our client. With this example, we've also got high-resolution palaeoenvironmental data and chronology. And that's important for understanding how coastal wetlands form. It's still very poorly understood how vegetation succession happens in a coastal environment. With this, we've demonstrated an early freshwater marsh, and then that transitioning into salt marsh before finally becoming subsumed by an expanding estuary with a creek system developing on mudflats. So as part of this project, we've created a legacy data set that can be used, reinterpreted, used by other investigators to understand better how coastal wetlands form. Other examples of this type of project are the Medbury project on the south coast, and as part of that project, we also had students from the University of Brighton who were studying exactly that. How do mudflats vegetate? How do they form? And they were very interested in our paleoenvironmental data to see how that connected with a modern mudflat environment. So these large-scale projects are creating really important legacy data sets. And what will be really interesting with schemes like this is how they develop over time, because particularly with the Medbury example, which is a few years advanced on the Skefflling scheme, is how modern coastal processes have actually affected the design of the scheme. It wasn't what they expected to happen. Some of these storms, these winter storms that we're having, are reshaping and remodelling the coast in ways that were not expected. So again, this data is really important. What it also shows is we're recreating a landscape that basically dates back to the sort of late Neolithic, early Bronze Age. And that was, again, the same at Medbury. We had this situation where we're not recreating the past exactly, but we are returning the landscape to a more resilient form. And particularly in the case of salt marshes, they're really poorly appreciated for the fact that they protect against coastal erosion and freshwater flooding. And again, they're one of the most threatened habitats that we have. And there was an article just this morning in The Guardian talking about just that. So this is extremely relevant, even though it's a legacy paleoenvironmental data, it's extremely relevant to what's happening now. So I'm just going to leave on these points. So this landscape investigation data can have a profound effect on the scheme design, and it can influence the project. And undertaken early enough, it might even be able to improve the performance of that scheme. We can demonstrate vegetation succession in a range of habitats, and that can be directly analogous with the proposed scheme. And understanding that landscape context can help to prolong the survival of archaeological remains. And I also just want to add in something from Sadie's presentation this morning. It's about going beyond compliance. These things are going beyond what we're required to do because we're having those conversations with our clients and with our colleagues. And I think that's a really important message to take away from any of these projects. They are collaborative, they're multidisciplinary, and we need to have these conversations with a matter of urgency. Thank you.